Hello there, friends. Welcome to BJJ Meditations. This is BJJ Meditations episode number 44. I'm your host, Joe Hannon, the guy who woke up this morning with Love in an Elevator by Aerosmith stuck in his head. Which, by the way, if you haven't revisited the Love in an Elevator music video in some time, I highly suggest that you do because it's a good relic of things that would not fly in 2023 but were totally acceptable in the early 90s, possibly late 80s. I don't really know when Love in an Elevator was recorded, but it also is kind of one of those pop songs where you listen to it and you realize how far we've fallen. I mean, Aerosmith was certainly not a great band, but they were a good band. I guess they still are a band. I don't even know. But yeah, just the thought that went into something so seemingly inane is spellbinding, which thought that goes into things that are seemingly inane is kind of a hallmark of all things BJJ Meditations, so I guess that's appropriate. Anyway, I'm back. I was on another trip to Central America for work reasons, and I'm telling you, if you have to go anywhere for work, this particular country in Central America is a fantastic place to go. Happened to be there with Emily Kwok. First time we've sat down face to face in a few months since she's now living there, mostly full time. She still travels a lot. But it was a great opportunity to just sit down, train together, something we haven't done in a while. Also to train together with Jerry Hurtado, her amazing black belt husband. Also a Marcelo Garcia black belt. Forget what number Jerry is. I think it's probably on the Marcelo Garcia website, but he's up there. Awesome to train outdoors in the jungle. Definitely a cool experience, which I'll get more into later. But yeah, you go on these long journeys and you come back, and there's definitely a period of integration that has to take place in terms of the things you learned, the things you saw. Your perspective shifts. And I'm kind of hoping this episode, which I don't really have much of an agenda for, can be just that. It's going to be sort of like an open journal of sorts, which was the original intention of BJJ Meditations when I launched it, was to be an open training journal. And this was certainly a training experience, both a jiu-jitsu training experience, a surfing training experience, and just a life training experience. But I'm back. I'm sitting with these things. I'm trying to integrate them into something like a lesson, and perhaps just sitting here and talking about it with you will be mutually beneficial. Or maybe it won't. Maybe it'll just be another version of Love in an Elevator. We'll see. But yeah, you go to this particular place and it's fairly remote. The last 20 kilometers into town are a pitted, rutted gravel jungle road that's more or less impassable unless you have four-wheel drive. And it's sort of quickly becoming a Bali type destination where Westerners gravitate there, gentrify it to a degree. You can sense the money that's in the atmosphere. But you can also sense the very strong presence of both the native culture, which is beautiful, and just the seemingly incomparable rate of life per square inch. It's the thing that always blows me away when I go to the jungle, is that, I spend a fair amount of time outside, particularly here in the Northeast. And I'm always appreciative of wildlife, plant life, things of this nature. But when you go to the jungle, everything is just teeming with life. And everything is seemingly trying to subdue or overcome human life, which is quite an adjustment. And you'll just be sitting there minding your business, and you'll look down at a railing or something and notice that it's just swarming with thousands of ants. Or you'll look at like a single inch of jungle floor and you'll just see like how much stuff is growing out of the soil. You think about all the microbes that are rich in that soil just because of the climate differential, it always being around 80 degrees or higher and jungle-like humidity. And I think that level of life per square inch has sort of like a radiant energy, to the point where the first couple days in the jungle, you just feel, or at least I feel, kind of shell shocked in a way. And I think it's because you're just being blasted with life in a way that you're not being blasted with life in the Northeast. And after a few days, I get used to that. I think most people kind of settle into the jungle. The jungle settles into them. And you return home. And the longest I've stayed there is about a week. And you return home after a week, and everything just kind of feels more spacious and more subdued in a way that it doesn't when you return from a trip someplace else. And I've traveled. I'm certainly not as well traveled as I'm sure some of you are, but I've traveled a fair bit. I've been to Europe. I've been to remote locations like the Arctic Circle. Um, I've been to the Caribbean. I've been to the West Coast. I have not been to, like Central Europe yet, which is somewhere I want to go. But the feeling of spaciousness after returning from the jungle is something that I have yet to encounter, and I think it has a lot to do with that life per square inch feeling. It also has a lot to do with the fact that I get a break from my responsibilities as a parent. I was saying to my wife, Frances, when I got home that it's remarkable how much time you have to think and to do when you don't have a small human to look after. Lots of, in addition to the work that I was there doing with Emily and with the person we work with, there was a lot of time for just quiet reflection, a lot of time for consideration and thinking. And it's almost, the energy from that is paradoxical when you compare it to the life blasting energy that you get just from the sheer quantity of life in the jungle. But it's also a strong and distant departure from what I'm typically doing here at home, both in my jiu-jitsu and in my work and my personal sense of well-being. Here, everything gets fitted into 5, 10, 15, 20-minute intervals like recording this podcast. But there, the day is your oyster when you don't have a small human to look after. It's amazing how things shift when you become a parent. I wouldn't have it any other way. But yeah, the primary way that I spent most of my time down there, in addition to working, was surfing. And I feel like a totally different surfer every time I go down there. I think I've talked a bit about surfing on this podcast in the past, so I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself for some of you, but this is important context. If we were to meet and discuss surfing and you were coming in cold to me as a human being and you asked if I surfed, I would say no. I'm not a surfer. I would never call myself a surfer because the people I know who are surfers, even just the Jersey Shore surfers who have grown up in proximity to the water and have been out there far more often than I have, they have a comfort and familiarity and respect and an understanding for the ocean that I do not have as sort of a landlocked denizen of northern New Jersey. So while I can sometimes get up on a surfboard and ride a wave, I would not call myself a surfer, especially in a place like this place where every day the ocean is just a completely different animal. And the surf is far more intense. And even on mild days, the waves are just stronger and more volatile than they are, say, off the Jersey Shore here. And a lot of ways, going back this time to the jungle and surfing, it was like I had never surfed before. The ocean was completely different. It was far more hostile. I had this experience on the second day where I hadn't felt this way since I was a little kid, but I had a small moment of like panic in the water where I fell off a rather large wave and I was short on breath because I had just been struggling so hard to paddle out through this intense break. And, the ocean was having its way with me. And I remember thinking to myself, like, if I have to swim or paddle here, like, I'm just not going to be able to do it. I'm just too tired. I kind of like frantically kicked back up to the surface and grabbed my board and just hung out in the devil's dishwasher there for a few minutes and caught myself before I just rode boogie board style back to the shore because I just didn't have it in me to get through the break. And having felt that, I hadn't felt like that since I was a child And it kind of set the tone for me for the rest of the week. It's different when you're up against something like that and you have a family that you have to go back home to. You certainly feel fear more palpably. It was very much like my return to jiu-jitsu competition, where it felt like the stakes were much higher, even though they were, in fact, much lower. Just because I'm far more aware of the risks now than I used to be, just because I have humans who, in some way, depend on me. But that kind of experience colored the rest of the trip, and there was a lot of me kind of like pushing through it to get back out, pushing through literally very intense shore breaks to get back out to the position where I could actually surf, and pushing through this fear that I hadn't felt in a long time. It got me reflecting a lot about my jiu-jitsu, because jiu-jitsu training down there in the jungle actually became like an exercise in recovery more so than exercise as it is here when I'm home or when I'm at the school. And it became a recovery exercise because it was familiar. It was a familiar way of moving my body. It was a familiar way of engaging my mind. And that was had a grounding effect in this situation where I had little to no understanding of what I'm doing. You know, it seemed like I had learned to surf in a totally different ocean, and now I was up against something different. But it really brought me face to face with that beginner's mind, which, as a black belt, let's be honest, like, it's hard to summon that. It's really hard to truly approach these things with fresh eyes and fresh perspective if you've been training for nearly a decade. It takes training something else to rekindle that feeling. And it was a really good empathetic exercise, I think, especially this time of year. You know, this time of year in jiu-jitsu, with the new year just around the corner, we always get a large influx of new students in the school. And I think it's important for instructors and upper belts in general, people who are responsible for these younger students, to remember the fear and the psychology and the desires that go into approaching this thing with a brand new perspective. And I'm grateful for the ass kicking I took in the surf in Central America, because it's helping me keep that at the forefront of my mind as we head into a new year and hopefully welcome a lot of new people into the school. They're very much going to be feeling like I was feeling out in the devil's dishwasher, getting held down, frantically resurfacing for that board. Yeah. And I think it's useful to think about the utility of fear. In the water, it's certainly has the utility. It keeps you alive. It keeps you from doing stupid things. But in that particular situation, that panic, that fear response would have killed me if I had kind of let it take over fully. You can't fight the ocean. You have to move with it. And that was sort of like one of the salient lessons that I got from surfing, was that I still have a lot of work to do in terms of becoming like a water man, being at ease in the water, but also being able to take it seriously and knowing what to do, having the skills to navigate it. It got me thinking I need to start my son in swim lessons sooner rather than later. But it also got me thinking about my game. And this came up as I was training with Emily and Jerry in the jungle too. There was a moment, Emily was training with this local tremendous athlete. She's a woman, purple belt, very gifted athlete, very serious student. I can tell that she takes everything Emily says seriously, and then also practices it deliberately on her own time. But Emily taught a brilliant lesson, which I participated in as a student, and it got me to realize that so much of my game is about framing away. And I think this is kind of a taller guy thing. Like, when you have longer frames, you have long limbs, you're tempted to use them to create space and to make distance between you and your opponent when it's needed, especially if you like to play guard like I do. But the nature of the lesson was actually encouraging a softness and a like kind of a welcoming in to set traps. And I just wasn't getting it at first. I was in this resistant framing mindset, probably just from getting pummeled in the ocean so much, but also just because that's a major cornerstone of my game. And I've said this, I don't know how many times on this podcast, and it just underscores my hypocrisy as a jiu-jitsu instructor. It underscores the need for us to walk the talk and to practice what we preach, and to also have good coaches who can point this stuff out to you. But jiu-jitsu is an exercise in receptivity, and this is a classic example of where I was not being receptive. I needed to allow my opponent to come in order to accomplish what I wanted to accomplish, just as I needed to allow the ocean to do what it's going to do, because it was absolutely futile to try and like overpower the ocean. It was only going to result in my demise as a human life form. It's interesting because I came back on Saturday. Today is Monday. I'm recording this episode on Monday. I came back on Saturday, and I was training with somebody who ordinarily gives me a very hard time. Like one of the few people in the gym who can break my grips, and they have a very strong passing game, and they just have a very sturdy base, like their lower body, their legs, they're like tree trunks. So it's really like trying to play De La Riva against a redwood tree sometimes, just not happening. And I realized that a lot of times I feel the strength in this person's lower body, and it prompts me to respond in turn, so I'm just shoving as hard as I can against the redwood tree. It's futile. And this time, having had that lesson from Emily, having had that lesson in the water, I was far more receptive, and it was like this person just didn't know what to do with me. I definitely was able to paradoxically enforce my will a lot more, and was able to have a more interesting role, and would have won the round on points too if it had been a scored round. So yeah, that was a very beneficial lesson that I think ordinarily, if I had just been training jiu-jitsu, had I not been surfing, had I not been in a part of the world where I'm fully out of my comfort zone, I would not have fully appreciated. Then sort of the other realization that came from this experience in the jungle was something that I had discussed with the guy Emily and I work for, when we were out, and it was a particularly rough day. It was the last day in the jungle, and I tried to paddle out once, nearly made it, and I couldn't. I had no more strength. I had to go back to shore, caught my breath, tried to pick a different line where the waves were converging, where I thought there was a rip that would help me get out. Did it again. My leash broke. So I had to go back to shore. Luckily, I was able to get the board before it got swept away, went back to shore, repaired the leash, finally made it out on the third day, and on the third try, and was just totally exhausted. And he was out there to welcome me, and he was so seemingly proud that I hadn't given up and that I kind of thought my way through it and found a way to get out. And I said to him, I think that some days you're surfing and then other days you're paddling, and today is just a paddling day. And that was the lesson. It became a lesson in paddling after that. And I saw this inefficiency that he brought to light, and learned all these things like cruising speed of the board and how to get up to that cruising speed, and how it's inefficient to try and push beyond that cruising speed for a certain amount of time. And it was just this like really revelatory learning experience that I was able to think critically about the efficiency of paddling, and how my tendency to kind of just put my head down and blast through things to my own detriment is both like a blessing and a curse, because I can destroy myself in the process, just as how like I could have destroyed myself trying to paddle out and getting through that shore break. And I quickly realized like this surfing versus paddling dichotomy is not about surfing. It's really about my life in general, and where might I find better ways of doing things? Like where might I be able to take a step back and look for efficiency where there isn't efficiency, both in my jiu-jitsu, in my professional life, my personal life, in my surfing. And yeah, just another sort of like invaluable takeaway from the whole experience. But I look back at this experience to kind of like sum it all up, put a bow on it. And it all boiled down to mindset for me. Choosing the sort of the learning theorist mindset versus the entity theorist mindset. Like I can become good at this with enough practice versus, I am good or bad at this. Because for me, the I am good or bad at this thinking is the ultimate source of frustration. And that frustration is the roadblock to learning. And the last time we were there surfing, I've kind of like become self-aware enough to know that when I hit a point of frustration, it's time for me to like take a break, come back to the next day or an hour later or 5 minutes later, 10 minutes later, refreshed. But I didn't really have that option this time. So it was really had to make a conscious choice of like, am I going to keep trying to surf here or am I going to try and paddle? Am I going to keep resisting with these strong frames or am I going to create space for my opponent to come in and then work from there? And it was, while I would have much rather have had like greater success in the waves in terms of what this guy would call getting the shot, having that great shot I could post on Instagram of me doing something epic. As much as I would have loved to have that experience for my ego, I didn't get it. But I think what I got instead was far more valuable. And I think that if we all try and systematize the obtainment of that experience in our grappling and in our lives, we're all going to be sort of better off for it in the long run. But anyway, that about wraps it up. That's about all I have to say on this subject. Thank you for listening. And I'm going to do my best to honor my commitment to be more consistent with this podcast. I actually posted a question on Instagram. What can I talk about on today's episode? I didn't get any responses. I'm hoping I get some later, but that's something I'm going to do more often, is just ask for things that are on your mind that hopefully I can talk about and provide some insights, or at least maybe even better, raise some questions that are worth considering. But yeah, going to try my damnedest to be more consistent, with the caveat that my work life is a bit chaotic and my family life is my priority. So sometimes it just ain't going to happen, but know that I'm here and know that I'm thinking about you. Know that I'm thinking about our art and what we do. Speaking of thinking, I was washing my face to get ready for this episode, and I realized that I've worn this same sweatshirt for the past like 4 or 5 episodes. It's just sweatshirt weather in the Northeast. But yeah, if there's anyone out there from Kekawa Collective listening, I really dig your stuff. I've got your backpack. I've got this sweatshirt. Yeah. If you want to sponsor the podcast, hit me up, man. I love your gear. If not, aloha and all that. Really love your stuff for an uptight Northeasterner. But yeah, I guess the usual closing caveats here. The new website is up, bjjmeditations.com. That's where you can book in-person or online coaching sessions with me. That's the best way to support me. Second best way to support me, you can make a donation through Venmo. The Venmo is also on the website. Hoping to get some merchandise going soon. Pat had asked like for some merchandise for Christmas, and I've had like mixed feelings about the whole merch thing. But ultimately I think those mixed feelings come from a tendency to self-sabotage and undermine my potential success. So yeah, look for merch in the coming weeks. You can also read the essays that underpin some of these episodes on the website. Speaking of which, Liz, my collaborator, is going to be back in action with meditation and in artistic reflection on that meditation. The meditation that I wrote a couple weeks back. So stay tuned for that. Happy to have Liz back in the mix. We've both kind of just been in transition lately, I think. So yeah, stay tuned for that. Also, good way to support me is to check out the Highest Levels podcast on BJJ Mental Models. That's a podcast that I do with Emily Kwok, where we talk a bit about frameworks we use in our peak performance consulting business and how you might apply them personally to your life and to your jiu-jitsu. We recorded an episode on location while we were in Central America, and I don't know when Mr. Quad is planning on posting that, but definitely check it out. I believe there's a free trial offer for BJJ mental models where like it's no obligation. You can try it out and see if you like it for any length of time. But yeah, there's not just our podcast, but there's just like a wealth of great information on that website and great community. People who, if you're drawn to this podcast in terms of using this art to transform your life, you'll find a lot of like-minded, beautiful souls on that in that ecosystem as well. Other than that, if you're listening, you like it, please like, subscribe, review, and share on whatever platform you're listening here. You can also read me and follow me on Substack. I've got a short story that I might put up today on Substack about deer hunting based on some true events that happened to me as a kid. So stay tuned for that. And also, finally, same as always, you can come train at Princeton Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. We welcome any and all academies. Doesn't matter what color gi you're wearing, as long as it's clean. Come and train with us. In 2024, we're running a new special. We're calling the 47 Ronin Challenge, the 47 Challenge, named after the 47 Ronin, which is a great film and a great story if you haven't heard of it before. Basically, the deal is for $70, you get 4 classes and a free gi. Sign up after those 4 classes after you complete the challenge, and we take $70 off your first month's membership. It's like over $250 in savings when you take it all together. So I think it's a pretty good deal. Hopefully you do too. But that is it, folks. Thank you very much for listening. Hope you have a fantastic week on the mats. Train well and see you soon.